The NHL season is officially underway. Now, I know the global series happened, but the puck has officially dropped in North America. And at this point, almost every team has played their first game of what is going to be a wild season. We have crazy contract negotiations, the start of an all-time Calder race, teams trying to make the playoffs for the first time in years, and the best player in the world's quest back to the Stanley Cup. The 2024 NHL season ended in an intense 7-game series, with the Panthers obviously ending up and winning. And this offseason, they let go of some guys that helped them achieve that goal. Brandon Montour, after spending 4 seasons with the Panthers and quarterbacking their top power play, signed a 7-year, $50 million deal with the Kraken. Tarasenko inked a 2-year, $9.5 million deal with the Red Wings. OEL, following a season in Florida where he filled in for an injured Montour on the top pair, signed a 4-year, $14 million deal with the Leafs. Goalie Anthony Stolarz had a stellar season backing up Sergei Bobrovsky, ranking second in the league for save percentage and goals against average for goalies that played at least 20 games, and he signed a 2-year, $5 million deal with the Leafs as well. Kevin Stenlund, who was key on the penalty kill, signed with Utah. Fan favorite Ryan Lomberg signed a 2-year deal with Calgary, so there were a lot of key departures for Florida. To replace them, they brought in Nate Schmidt, who signed a 1-year deal with the Panthers after being bought out by the Jets, and he could help on Florida's second or third line defensive pairing. Thomas Nosek dealt with a foot injury last season that required surgery, limiting him to just 6 points in 36 games with the Devils, but he could center Florida's fourth line or play on the left side. Adam Boqvist, the 2018 8th overall pick, signed a 1-year deal after being bought out by the Blue Jackets and could help Florida's power play. And Florida also picked up his older brother Jesper Boqvist, who could center Florida's fourth line. So with everything put together, I do think the Panthers got slightly worse than what they were last season, but that's just what happens when you win the Cup. All your pending free agents have their stock go up, making it harder to pay them. So they did the best they could at filling in those holes. And with Florida maybe becoming a little bit weaker, that opens the door for a team like Edmonton, who was 1 game away from lifting the Stanley Cup last season. The Oilers honestly enter the season as the team to beat. This Oilers team looks pretty lethal on paper. While most top teams typically struggle in the summer due to the salary cap constraints, the Oilers arguably got better, which is frightening for the rest of the league. For one, they finally bought out Jack Campbell's contract, which was a smart move to fix a major mistake from the Ken Holland era, and that freed up about $3.9 million in cap space that the Oilers used to keep key veterans and make solid signings. Adding Victor Arvidsson fills a big need for a right winger who should thrive alongside Draisaitl, while Jeff Skinner's 1-year deal has the potential to be a steal if he stays healthy and contributes. Ultimately, extending Leon Draisaitl for 8 years is a huge win, keeping the Oilers' contention window open and likely setting the stage for a McDavid extension as well. This team really does just have all the tools to make it back to the Cup final if they really want to. But one team that they will have to beat out if they want the Cup is the reigning President's Trophy winners, the New York Rangers. After falling short in the Eastern Conference Final, Chris Drury hinted at changes, but as the new season approaches, the Rangers are sticking with tweaks instead of major moves. Alexis Lafreniere, after a sort of breakout season last year, needs to keep building on that success, while Braden Schneider is expected to take on tougher defensive minutes. Despite some depth concerns like Ryan Lindgren's injury and the questions around Kaapo Kakko and the third defensive pair, the Rangers are hoping to remain a playoff lock. Key players like Lafreniere and Philip Hedl are under pressure to improve on 5-on-5 production and support Shesterkin in net. Over the offseason, Captain Jacob Trouba said that this will be the last crack for this core, so we'll see if they make the most out of it. The best case scenario for this team is obviously winning the Stanley Cup, while the worst could be an early playoff exit, which is entirely possible due to such a top-heavy Metro division. One team that will definitely be back in the playoffs this year is the New Jersey Devils. The Devils had a rough 2024 season, mainly due to key injuries and shaky goaltending. Jack Hughes' early season shoulder injury and Dougie Hamilton's torn pectoral muscle set the team back, while the decision to stick with Vitek Vanacek and Akira Schmid in net didn't really pay off. As a result, a team full of young talent underachieved. Now, heading into the 2025 season, the Devils had made some big moves. They brought in Sheldon Keefe as the head coach and added Jacob Markstrom in net to stabilize their defense. With a core led by Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, and Timo Meier, this team still has tons of offensive power. Hughes could easily put up over 100 points if he stays healthy, and Hischier will look to bounce back after a down year defensively. On the back end, New Jersey bolstered its blue line by adding Brett Pesce and Brendan Dillon, which should help a ton. If Markstrom can provide consistent goaltending, something that the Devils have lacked over the years, they should be in much better shape this season. Another team who got a goalie over the offseason and hope to make the playoffs is the Ottawa Senators, who had a very rough 2024 season. They fell short of expectations, and now the season feels like a make-or-break moment for their rebuild. There's a chance for a rebound similar to the New Jersey Devils, but they still might miss the playoffs. A lot honestly hinges on the new goalie Linus Ullmark, who needs to prove that he can thrive despite Ottawa's weak defense. Health is also a concern, especially for Josh Norris, who needs to regain his scoring touch. While the defense looks solid with players like Jake Sanderson and Artem Zub, offensive struggles still remain, particularly on the bottom lines. The best case scenario for the Senators team is that they bounce back and become a playoff contender. But as easily as that can happen, it's even easier for it to happen that last season's struggles continue, leaving the rebuild far from complete. And if the Sens fumble, it opens up the door for a lot of other teams to compete for those 2 Eastern wildcard spots. Making last year's playoffs was impressive for the Capitals given their -37 goal differential, the lowest to make the playoffs in the salary cap era. But after a quick exit against the Rangers, President Brian McClellan aimed to improve a team that relied too heavily on 1-goal victories. The Caps made a lot of notable offseason moves, like acquiring PLD and Andrew Mangiapane, who could provide a significant offensive boost. Additionally, bringing in Logan Thompson gives them a reliable backup goalie to support Charlie Lindgren. However, despite these improvements, they still face an uphill battle. The team is better, but just not strong enough to be considered a playoff contender just yet. Key questions linger around Ovechkin's performance and the effectiveness of their younger players. Washington is in a careful position, needing to balance their aging core while trying to return to postseason contention. The path back to the playoffs will be tightly contested, especially with everyone else gunning for that spot. The last couple of seasons have been super tough for Penguins fans, and now they're fighting just to make the playoffs yet again. Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Karlsson are still delivering solid performances, but they're basically the only reliable players on that team, with the rest of the roster not impressing much. Plus, their power play was dead last in the league last season, so new assistant coach David Quinn has his work cut out for him. While Crosby continues to shine, losing Gensel is a huge hit, and weaknesses in the defense could hold them back. It won't be easy in such a competitive conference, so expecting this aging core and shaky supporting cast to make the playoffs is a huge ask. Detroit is another one of those teams that'll be going for the playoff spot this year. Since the rebuild hit rock bottom in 2020, the Red Wings have been climbing back up ever so slowly. They showed some promise last season, missing the playoffs by just 1 point, but the big question is, are they actually good or was last season just a fluke? The spotlight is on young guns Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider. Both are solid, but if they can step up their games, Detroit finally might be able to break their playoff drought. Seider hasn't really been the same ever since his Calder-winning rookie season, and Raymond has a shiny new contract to live up to. They got Patrick Kane back, who was a huge help last season, and they also acquired Vladimir Tarasenko, who is fresh off a Stanley Cup win with the Panthers. In the end, the Red Wings have some bright spots, but whether they can pull it all together for a playoff run is still up in the air. The best case scenario for them has them flying into the postseason, while the worst keeps them stuck in that in-between zone for yet another season. In the West, the newest franchise of the NHL, the Utah Hockey Club, actually have a pretty decent team. They just named Keller captain, they extended Genther for 8 years, and they acquired some big pieces in the offseason. Last season, they were more competitive than people were expecting, so if they can bring that same surprise to this season, they can definitely end up in the playoffs. They acquired John Marino from New Jersey, but the big piece was Mikhail Sergachev from Tampa. He had a rough end of the season last year facing an injury, but if he could play healthy, he'll be a very good number 1 defenseman for Utah. And it was sort of a surprise to trade him away from a Lightning perspective. He was a good defenseman for them, but they feel like he didn't really live up to his contract. In return, they got Connor Geekie, who can be a good middle 6 forward, and they got JJ Moser, who can play bottom pair minutes on the back end. They might have gotten a bit weaker, but you can't really count out a team with Nikita Kucherov and Braden Point on it. In addition to them, they got Jake Gensel, largely in part to replacing their longtime captain Steven Stamkos, who they let walk in the offseason after kinda disrespecting him with the contract they offered him. He ended up going to Nashville, who absolutely went all in this offseason. They were busy by bringing in Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea to give their offense a boost. These moves should make them more competitive and add some much-needed scoring depth to the team. Stamkos and Marchessault bring firepower, and Shea helps them out on the defense. With Andrew Burnett's fast-paced system and players like Yossi, Saros, and Forsberg leading the way, the Preds are looking super solid. Though there are still some questions about their depth on defense and at center, nonetheless, they can still be considered a very good contending team. But to do so, they'll have to beat out the team they lost to last year in the playoffs, the Vancouver Canucks. The Canucks had a huge season last year, hitting 110 points with stars like Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson, JT Miller, and Thatcher Demko leading the way. Now they're aiming for even higher for the 2025 season. In the offseason, they brought in Jake DeBrusk, who should strengthen that top six, but there are still some concerns about the potential regression from last season's success and Thatcher Demko's health. Thatcher Demko's health is a big question mark for the Canucks. When he's healthy, he's one of the league's top goalies, but he dealt with some injuries over the offseason and during the playoffs. And that's where Artur Silovs comes in. The young Latvian goalie impressed last season in the playoffs and was MVP at the 2023 World Championship. He's shown potential, but is still unproven at the NHL level. If Demko's injuries continue, Silovs could play a bigger role, though it's a big step up for him. The Canucks are really hoping that Demko can stay healthy, but Silovs is a solid backup option. That being said, with their core in place, the Canucks are still legit contenders, though their defense and goaltending depth could be question marks. And their defense is a question mark mainly because they lost one of their top 4 defensemen over the offseason. Nikita Zadorov signed in Boston for $5 million a year, along with other former Canuck Elias Lindholm. It's a big season for the new additions to step up. Lindholm, though not perfect, fills the gap left at center, and Zadorov brings size and physicality to the defense. Boston lost half of their elite goaltending tandem this season as Ullmark left the team, leaving Swayman to start between the pipes. They could very well contend for the Cup, but with how stacked the East is, they could also just struggle this season. But the team that seems like brought the most additions in was the Chicago Blackhawks. By bringing in players like Teuvo Teravainen and Tyler Bertuzzi, they give Bedard the help he needs to thrive. Despite the new additions and a healthy Taylor Hall, they might still be near the bottom of the league, which could help them land another top prospect. The big question is how Bedard will perform in his second season. If he builds on his impressive 61 points from last year and improves defensively, a 90-point season is very possible. With new talent around him, this season could be a turning point for both Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks. As the 2024-2025 NHL season kicks off, there's a lot to watch for. The Panthers are looking to defend their title, while the Oilers seem primed for a strong run. With teams shaking up their rosters and new faces stepping in, it's going to be a competitive year. Expect surprises, stand-up performances, and plenty of action. It should be an interesting season to say the least.